Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gavesty here. This is the raid guide for Heroic Gruul, one of the early bosses in Blackrock Foundry, and overall fairly simple encounter. Mostly this will focus on strong healing and really strong tanks or tank swapping mechanics essentially. I also want to thank my friend Nafani for letting me use the video footage you see here. Unfortunately my video for this fight got corrupted, so if you want some Death Knight action, feel free to check out her Twitch stream at the bottom right there. And yeah, thanks to her. So let's get started. Now your raid composition is not super important. You simply need to focus on how many healers you want to bring. So you may have to experiment depending on your raid size, your strength of healing, all that good stuff. The main thing is just to cover the potential spike damage that you'll get from the slice attacks in addition to the other mechanics. He also has an intermediary phase that does a fair bit of raid damage. We decided to do 4 healers for our raid, and it works, but I think 5 would have been a little more comfortable. I'm pretty sure that the Berserk timer, if there is one, I don't know what it is, but it's probably fairly lengthy for this encounter. So survival is probably more important than 1 extra DPS, depending on how big your raid is. You can also somewhat gimmick some of the slice mechanics by using particular tanks for this fight, but I don't really think it's worth it. Generally speaking, you're not going to be able to immune or single tank soak the majority of the slices, and therefore you still have to handle the damage as if it is normal most of the time. So I would just concentrate on your strongest tanks as normal. Now positioning for this encounter is fairly simple. Just form up 2 equal-sized groups on either side of the boss. So you form a large triangle around him. He has a pretty large hitbox, and if these groups can be equal in player size or as close to it as possible, 1 difference, that is ideal. Inferno Slice is easily the most important mechanic, so once you master this, the fight will really come together very quickly. About every 17 to 18 seconds, Gruul will cast Inferno Slice at the location of the current tank, the tank with threat on Gruul at the time. When it completes, after a 2-second cast, it will slice a fairly large cone at that player's location, hitting all players in the area. This does very significant fire damage, and it splits among all the players that are hit. So you've seen this sort of mechanic before. It's just a split, cleave attack of damage. Now it's important to note that in addition to the Inferno Slice initial hit, there's also stacking dot. So ideally, your raid will not be taking multiple slice dots in a row, and therefore getting the stacking damage higher than it needs to be. The duration of the debuff is only 30 seconds, so any non-tank player can alternate getting stacks of this, and they'll only have 1 stack at most. But if you screw up the targeting, then you'll have raid members getting 2 stacks or higher, which is just extra dot damage you don't need to deal with. Now, in addition to the actual slice hit, which is moderate damage, relatively, there's also an Infernal Strike that's associated with the hit, and that will hit the tank at the time individually. The Inferno Strike hits very hard, so it's important that your tanks use their own mitigation or cooldowns for that actual hit. And if you don't do this, particularly if a tank is not full health, which is fairly common, that will kill that tank. So it's really important that you watch that. Tanks will get hit by both effects simultaneously, so the Inferno Strike along with the Inferno Slice, mitigated value. So you need to be ready for both of those incoming damage hits. So the way to handle Inferno Slice is solely based on the tank swaps. You want to swap every 3 stacks of the Inferno Slice debuff or dot. And if you do this, the other tank debuff throughout the fight will be managed on its own. You don't have to think about it. So here's the basic tank pattern for handling Inferno Slice. You got your 3 groups. So we've got the front position here, the top for tanks. Got group alpha in the bottom left, half the raid, and then the other half is in group beta, the bottom right. So at the beginning of the fight, obviously, both tanks A and tank B have 0 stacks of slice. And so you have tank A standing in front here around the front position, and tank B is in the bottom left at group alpha position. Now, during the first Inferno Slice, in the 2-second cast period, tank B will taunt and have Inferno Slice come down here. So Slice is going to hit Tank B and Group A, Group Alpha A, and each of these party members will have 1 stack. Now immediately Tank A taunts back off of Tank B, so that after the slice hits, there aren't any incidental melee hits hitting players stacked up in Group A. So Tank A now has threat again, and meanwhile Tank B makes his way or her way across to Group B, or Group Beta, and stays in this position until the next Inferno Slice occurs. And once again, Inferno Slice number 2 occurs. Tank B will taunt during the cast. Slice will hit Tank B, giving Tank B 2 stacks. And Group Beta raid members will also get 1 stack. Then once again, Tank A taunts back immediately. And just like before, Tank B moves back to Group Alpha. And then the final round of this will occur. The third Inferno Slice, Tank B taunts, giving Tank B 3 stacks of the Slice debuff. But because Group Alpha skipped around, their stacks have dropped, and so they only have 1 stack now. Now from this point, once Tank B has a 3rd stack of Slice, Tank A doesn't taunt back. Instead, Tank B moves to the front, and while Tank B is moving up front, Tank A is moving down. Tank A needs to make sure that their position is in the raid position that didn't take the last slice. So in this case, since A took it last, Tank B will position for Group Beta, and meanwhile Tank B is up front, holding the boss and tanking. From this point forward, the entire process just repeats, except Tank A is doing all the slice taunting mid-cast, and Tank B is taunting back afterwards. And you can just repeat this process over and over throughout the remainder of the fight. Just remembering that 3 stacks is the key number for the tank to retain threat and move up front to tank the boss. Now, Overwhelming Blows is the other tank debuff, but more importantly, it is a sort of cleave attack. So it will hit the current tank as well as anyone within 10 yards of that tank, which is why it's critical that after a taunt during Inferno Slice into a particular raid group, the main tank that's up front taunts back immediately so that the boss is not able to use an Overwhelming Blows on the raid that is stacked up. But otherwise, the debuff stack for this will not be a problem because you'll be managing it based on Inferno Slice stacks anyway, so you don't have to think about it. For the raid, they'll need to frequently watch out for Overhead Smash, which is a sort of straight line attack that targets a random player in the raid. So usually we'll be facing one of the 2 raid groups. And there you can see it there in the back left. And when it occurs, there's a cast time, which gives you time to sidestep to get out of it. Now, generally speaking, it is in the interest of the raid to always move the same direction when they're avoiding this. The reason for this is that sometimes there will be overlap that basically has an Inferno Slice occur just after a overhead smash. And if this happens and the raid is spread out and the slash tries to hit that group, you might find that there aren't enough people soaking the slash, or the slice rather, and someone dies. So our general rule is just always to move clockwise or to the left if possible. Sometimes there will be environmental effects, the sort of raining rocks that you see around the room. They'll prevent you from going in that direction. So just make sure you're able to communicate that a particular group will have to move the other way in that case. The final mechanic is Petrification, and this is very similar to the mechanic that Gruul had originally in his first incarnation. Essentially, a small group of random raid members will be selected, non-tank players, and these players will receive the Petrifying Stone debuff, at which point they will start to petrify over a few seconds. After the petrification turns to 5 stacks, they will be turned to stone and shattered, and they will deal a small amount of damage to anyone within a few yards. So, just like the original version, the basic idea is to spread out, if you are afflicted with this, away from everyone else in the raid. And if you do this properly, then you won't deal damage to anyone, and you'll be fine. It's also ideal, if you can, to move behind your particular raid group while you're being petrified. This way you can still sometimes be in range of the Inferno Slice cleave and still help to soak or mitigate that damage, but not, being threatening to anyone with the Petrification. So ideally move slightly behind the raid group rather than far out to one side. You don't have to get that far away, so just watch your range radar and handle it accordingly. The final phase to discuss is Destructive Rampage, and this first occurs about a minute 45 into the fight or so. And the basic idea is during this 30-second period, Gruul is not tanked, but instead he will just chain cast his overhead smash ability, just randomly targeting people over and over. He also has a much faster cast time during this period, so you have less time to essentially sidestep and avoid it. Even if your raid avoids it, though, there's a fair bit of raid damage during this period, so don't be afraid to use some cooldowns or healing boosts or anything like that. And then once the phase ends after 30 seconds, he'll go back to being tanked just like normal. So with that, I think that covers everything for the raid guide for Heroic Gruul. Like I said, it's mostly about healing management, and of course your tanking needs to be spot on to handle these slice trades. But other than that, it's a fairly simple fight, mostly just about watching your positioning for smashes or petrification, and otherwise you just stand there and burn the boss or heal or whatever. So, as always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. By the way, don't be afraid to overhead smash that subscribe button if you want. I'd really appreciate it. You could slice it as well, maybe even Rampage on it. I don't know how that would work, but that'd be awesome.